It's about to get interesting, so subscribe and hit like so you don't miss the top content.
I stood in the corner of the room, holding a glass of wine that had long since lost its appeal. The party was in full swing, music, laughter, conversation, but I felt like an outsider among all these people. I didn't like such events, but Sarah, my wife, insisted. She always liked to be the center of attention, and I was used to following her, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone. Sarah was somewhere across the room, surrounded by a group of friends. She was laughing, gesticulating, and her voice stood out amongst the general noise. I watched her, as always, with admiration. She was beautiful, confident, and I still couldn't believe she had chosen me. We'd been together for 12 years now, and although our lives hadn't always been perfect, I thought we were happy. At least, I was happy. But something had changed lately. Sarah had become more distant, staying late at work more often, and our conversations had gotten shorter. I wrote it off to stress, to fatigue, to all those things that can take a toll on a relationship. I didn't want to believe there was anything wrong between us. I didn't want to think that she could cheat on me. And so I stood here, at this party, and I felt something inside of me clench. I couldn't explain why, but I had a feeling that something was wrong. I decided to walk over to Sarah's room to see if everything was okay. I walked across the room, trying not to draw attention to myself, and stopped a few feet away from her. She didn't notice me. She was too busy talking to a man I hadn't seen before. He was tall, with a confident smile and a charisma that seemed to draw people to him. Sarah laughed at his jokes, and I could see the way she looked at him. It wasn't just a friendly look. There was something more in her eyes, something that made my heart clench. I wanted to move closer to hear what they were talking about, but something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe intuition. I stayed where I was, watching them and feeling the anxiety growing inside me. And then I heard it, words that turned my world upside down. She was talking about our marriage, about our 12 years together, but it wasn't a recollection of happy moments. She mocked, at me, at us. She talked about how boring I was, how I never understood her, how she felt trapped. She was saying it to him, this man who looked at her with such interest, like she was the most interesting woman in the world. I felt the ground go out from under my feet. My hands were shaking, and I could barely hold my glass. I wanted to go up to her, to ask her how she could say such things, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with pain, anger, disbelief. I watched her put her hand on his arm, as she leaned closer to say something that made him laugh. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a conversation. It was something more, something that was shattering everything I believed in. I turned and walked out of the room. I needed to get away. I needed to get some air. I walked outside where the night air was cool and fresh. I stood there, breathing it in and feeling tears roll into my eyes. But I didn't cry. I just stood there staring into the darkness, trying to figure out what to do next. I thought about our 12 years, about how we met, how we fell in love, how we started a family. I thought about our children, our dreams, our promises, and I couldn't understand how it could all be ruined, how she could throw it all away so easily. I heard the door open and turned around. It was Sarah. She looked surprised to see me here. She walked over to me and asked if everything was okay. I looked at her and in her eyes I saw nothing but slight concern. She didn't even realize that I knew, that I had heard. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could. How could she betray us, our family, everything we built? But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just said I needed to leave. She nodded, but I saw something in her eyes that made me wonder. Was it regret, or just relief that I wasn't asking questions? I got in my car and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not now, not after what I'd heard. I drove down the deserted streets, feeling the anger and pain fighting inside me. I thought about what to do next, how to live with this, how to carry on. When I got home, I sat on the couch and stared into the void. My mind was spinning with thoughts that I couldn't stop. I thought about our children, about how this would affect them. I thought about myself, about how I would go on with my life, and I realized I had no answers, only questions, only pain. I knew that tomorrow I would have to look her in the eye. I'd have to talk to her. I'd have to make decisions. But now I just sat in the dark, feeling like the world was falling apart around me, and I didn't know how to put it back together. I woke up the next morning with a heavy head and the feeling that everything that had happened the previous night was just a bad dream. But reality quickly set in when I saw Sarah sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked like she had been up all night. Her eyes were red and her face was pale. She looked up at me, a mixture of fear and hope in her gaze. I sat down across from her, not knowing where to begin. We were silent for a few minutes, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Finally, she spoke. She said that she knew I had heard something, that I knew. Her voice was quiet but firm. She didn't try to make excuses. She just said that it had happened, that she didn't plan it, but it happened, and now she didn't know what to do. I listened to her, feeling my heart tearing apart. She talked about how distant we were from each other, how our lives had become routine, how she felt alone even when we were together. She said that this man just came into her life and she couldn't resist. She said she still loved me, loves our children, but she doesn't know if she can fix it. I wanted to scream that it wasn't an excuse, that she could have talked to me, told me how she felt. We could have tried to change things, but instead, she chose him. She chose betrayal. But I didn't say that. Instead, I asked how long it had been going on. She replied that a few months. A few months she lied to me. Some months she was with him while I thought she was at work. Some months she was destroying our family and I didn't even realize it. I felt tears roll into my eyes, but I didn't let myself cry. I didn't want to show her my weakness. Instead, I asked her what was going to happen next. She said she didn't know, that she wants us to try to make things right, but understands if I can't do that. She said she was willing to leave if I asked. I didn't know what to say back. On the one hand, I wanted her to leave. I wanted her to disappear from my life, to never see her face again. But on the other hand, I thought about our children. Lily and Jacob. How would they survive this? How would I explain to them that their mom wouldn't be living with us anymore? We sat in silence, each of us immersed in our own thoughts. I felt like I was on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could ruin everything. But I didn't know how to do the right thing. I didn't know how to do it in a way that wouldn't ruin our children's lives. In the end, I said we need time. Time to think, to figure out what to do next. She nodded, but I saw relief in her eyes. She was afraid I would immediately ask her to leave. But I couldn't do that. Not now. Not like this. She got up and went into the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the cup of coffee that was still in front of me. I felt like the world was crumbling around me, but I knew I had to be strong. For our children. For myself. I picked up my phone and started texting my best friend, Mike. I told him that I needed to talk. That something serious had happened. He responded almost immediately, saying he'd be there. And in that moment, I felt a little relieved. I knew I needed someone to listen to me. Someone who wouldn't judge. When Mike arrived, I told him everything. About how I'd heard Sarah at the party, how she confessed she had a lover. He listened in silence, not interrupting. And when I finished, he just said, "You deserve better than that." Those words stuck in my head. I deserve more. But what does that mean? What am I supposed to do? Fight for our family or let it go? I didn't know the answers. But I knew one thing, I didn't want to be who I was anymore. I don't want to live a lie anymore. I thanked Mike and told him I needed time to think. He hugged me and told me he was always there for me. And in that moment I felt that maybe everything would be okay. Maybe not right away, maybe not the way I want it to be, but it will be. I went back into the house, went into the bedroom and saw that Sarah was already asleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. At the woman I once loved more than anything in the world. The woman who had betrayed me. And I realized that the past no longer mattered. All that matters now is the future. And I had to decide what that future would be. It's been weeks since I learned the truth. Weeks that I spent in a constant struggle with myself. I tried to figure out what to do next, how to live with what had happened. Sarah kept insisting on therapy, that we should try to save our marriage. She told me that she loved me, that she wanted us to be together. But every time I looked at her, I saw not the woman I once loved, but the woman who had betrayed me. I decided to go to therapy. Not because I believed it would work, but because I felt I had to try it. For our children. For Lily and Jacob. They deserve for their parents to at least try to keep the family together. But with each session, I realized that forgiving Sarah wasn't going to be that easy. The therapist talked about trust and how it could be rebuilt, but I felt like every time I looked at Sarah, I wasn't seeing her, but the men she was with. And it was destroying me from the inside out. One evening, after another therapy session, I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, thinking about what to do next. Sarah was in the living room with the kids, and I could hear them laughing. It was a sound that always filled me with warmth, but now it seemed foreign. I felt like I was living in some parallel world where everything looked the same, but it wasn't the same at all. I went outside and sat on the steps in front of the house. The night was quiet, and the stars were shining brightly. I stared up at them, feeling as if the universe was watching me. And in that moment, I realized that I can't go on living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when everything inside of me was being torn apart. I walked back into the house and approached Sarah. She looked at me and I saw a question in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. I sat down next to her and told her we needed to talk. We went out into the backyard so the kids wouldn't hear us. I told her I couldn't live like this anymore. That I really tried, but I can't forgive her. I can't forget what happened and I can't trust her again. I told her that I love our children more than anything and that I will always be there for them, but I can't be with her. She listened to me and I could see tears rolling down her eyes. She said she realized that she had ruined everything we had and that she was sorry. She said she still loves me but understands if I can't be with her. She said she wants us to stay friends for the sake of the kids. I nodded, but inside I felt that a friendship between us would be impossible. Too much pain, too much betrayal. But I knew that for the sake of the kids, we should at least try. The next day, I started looking for an apartment. I knew I couldn't stay in a house where every corner reminded me of what we had lost. I found a small apartment close to our home so I could be closer to the kids. When I told them I would be living apart, they cried. Lily asked why I was leaving, and Jacob just stared at me silently with his big eyes. I hugged them and told them that I would always be there for them, that I would always be their daddy, and that I loved them more than anything. Sarah and I started the divorce process. It was hard, but we tried to do everything as civilized as possible. We agreed on joint custody of the children, and I tried to spend as much time with them as possible. Every moment with them was like a breath of fresh air in a sea of pain for me. A few months passed and I began to adjust to my new life. The apartment became my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself. I started going to the gym, found a new hobby, photography. It helped me to distract myself, to find something new in my life. One evening when I was coming home after a walk with the kids, I saw Sarah. She was standing outside my house, and in her hands was an envelope. She said it was a letter from him. From that man. She said he was leaving and that she wanted me to know. I took the envelope, but I didn't open it right away. I just stood there looking at her, feeling as if time had stopped. She said that she was sorry for what had happened and that she hoped that someday I would be able to forgive her. I nodded, but didn't say anything. She left and I was left standing outside, holding the envelope I knew would change everything. I walked into the apartment, sat down on the couch, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. He wrote that he was sorry for what had happened, that he never meant to destroy our family. He wrote that he was leaving, and that he hoped I could find the strength to forgive Sarah. He wrote that she still loved me and that he was just a mistake. Now when I look at my life, I realize that this is just the beginning of a new chapter where I have to learn to live again, where I have to find a way to be happy, even after everything that has happened. And I know it won't be easy, but I also know that I'm stronger than I thought, and that no matter what happens, I can handle it, for myself, for our children, for our family. It's been a few years since I started a new life, a life that, although full of hardships, was slowly beginning to make sense. Lily and Jacob had grown up and become more independent, but they still knew that I would always be there for them. I tried to spend as much time with them as I could, and every moment with them reminded me of what I was still moving forward for. Sarah and I continued to maintain a civilized relationship for the sake of the kids. We went to school events together, celebrated their birthdays, and tried to be a team even though we were no longer a couple. It wasn't easy, but we both realized it was important to Lily and Jacob. She moved to a different neighborhood, but we agreed that the kids would spend time with each of us equally. One night, as I was putting Lily and Jacob to bed, Lily asked me if I was happy. I looked at her big eyes full of curiosity and concern, and said that yes, I was happy, because I have them, because they are the most important thing in my life. I walked out of their room and sat on the couch. The apartment was quiet and I felt like I had finally found peace. I knew that there were still many challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was stronger than I thought, and that no matter what happened, I could handle it, for myself, for our children, for our family. I picked up a picture that was on the shelf. It was a family photo of us, taken many years ago. We were all smiling, and in that moment I felt as if time had stopped. I knew that the past no longer had power over me, that I could move on with my life, with them, with hope for the future, and that was all I needed. I decided it was time to move on. I started dating a woman named Emily that I met at work. She was kind, understanding, and she made me feel like myself. She knew about my past and what I was going through and supported me every step of the way. With her, I began to realize that love could be again, that I could be happy. One evening, as Emily and I sat in the kitchen drinking coffee, I told her how things had changed, how I had learned to forgive, how I had found the strength to move on. She listened to me, and in her eyes I saw understanding. She told me she was proud of me and that I deserved to be happy. I knew she was right. I do deserve happiness, and I found it, not in the past, but in the present, in our children, in new love, in myself. Now, as I look at my life, I realize that everything has fallen into place. The past no longer has power over me. I've learned to live again, to find joy in the little things, and to be the person I've always wanted to be. A father, a partner, a man who knows that happiness is possible, even after the darkest of times. And I know that no matter what happens, I can make it through, because I have them, because I have me, and that's all that matters.